Okay, it is now 10 a.m. Eastern Time, so we are going to get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are very excited about the Earth Optimism Summit. And this right here is the Earth Optimism Deep Dive, Collaborating to Solve a Crisis, the story of the North American Pollinator Protection Campaign. I'm Gary Krupnick. I head the Plant Conservation Unit within the Department of Botany at Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History. And I'm coming to you today from Rockville, Maryland. The North American Pollinator Protection Campaign, or which we call NAPPC, is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. NAPPC spans across countries, languages, and taxa, and it's entirely based on science. We hope today's presentation, we hope you can learn that NAPPC can serve as a model in collaborative conservation, and that our success over the past 20 years gives everyone a sense of optimism. Over the next hour, you're going to be hearing from 4 speakers, including myself. We're going to go over the history of collaboration. We're going to talk about the tools that we have created and how we use those tools for success, and how the underlying science holds everything together that NAPPC does. The Q&A box at the bottom of your screen is for you to ask the audience to ask questions during the presentations. After all 4 speakers speak, we'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible within the 1-hour time frame. So it is now my pleasure to hand over control to our first speaker, Kelly Rourke, who will introduce herself to the audience. Take it away, Kelly.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Rourke, and I'm the Director of Programs and Operations for Pollinator Partnership. I'm also the administrator of the North American Pollinator Protection Campaign, or NAPPC. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. When I started working with pollinators as an intern 7 years ago, I never dreamed I was entering such a complex and beautiful field. Pollinators are a driving force on planet Earth and a common ground for human beings. This is the story of how to handle a crisis with optimism and cooperation. We hope you will take what you've learned here today and apply the NAPPC model to your own conservation issue. Pollinators are essential to our planet. Pollination is when a pollen grain moves from the anther, the male part of a flower, to the stigma, the female part. Pollinators are the bees, butterflies, birds, bats, beetles, flies, and other animal vectors that transfer pollen to aid in plant reproduction. There are over 200,000 pollinating species worldwide, 20,000 species of bees alone, and 4,000 species of bees just in the United States. The diversity of pollinators is magnificent, and the habitat they need, and they in turn support, is just as critical. Nearly 90% of the Earth's flowering plants need pollinators to reproduce. Ecosystem biodiversity is enhanced when pollinators are present, and pollinators help regulate climate by sustaining vegetation. Pollinators help produce an estimated 1 out of 3 bites of food we eat, and the fruits and seeds produced from their floral visitation are a major part of the diet of about 25% of birds and many mammals. Pollinators really do provide us with a bounty here on planet Earth. Unfortunately, many species of pollinators are in severe decline. The managed honeybee, critical to our modern-day agricultural system, has experienced alarming levels of overwintering colony losses for the past 15 years. Native bees are in trouble too. According to the IUCN Red List, 1/4 of all bumblebee species in North America are in a threatened or near-threatened category. The iconic monarch butterfly has experienced similar losses to their overwintering numbers in both the central migration, as shown here, and the western population. There are a multitude of factors causing the decline of the health and populations of our Earth's pollinators. The pressures of climate change, parasites and pathogens, pesticide misuse, and loss of habitat are all working against our precious pollinators. This is a crisis. The North American Pollinator Protection Campaign, or NAPPC, has been working tirelessly since 1999 to help promote and protect pollinators across North America. Trinational representation at NAPPC is key and is just one of the ways NAPPC is unique. NAPPC is a public-private collaborative body coordinated by Pollinator Partnership, a 501c3 organization Because of the many years of NAPPC conversations across discipline, Pollinator Partnership was able to deliver unbiased collaborative ideas to the Obama administration to help craft the Presidential Memorandum on Pollinators, and an effort that united all government agencies in specific and impactful goals on the ground for pollinators. NAPPC was inspired by an idea from bee specialist Dr. Gabriela Chavarria, philanthropist beekeeper Paul Growald, and scientist Dr. May Berenbaum. The first NAPPC meeting had a modest 40 attendees from 3 countries, and it has since grown into a globally recognized force of 170 plus members. NAPPC's structure is one that can be replicated for other conservation topics or collaborative missions. From top down, we have a nonprofit champion, advisory steering committee, task force chairs, task force groups, and NAPPC members all working collectively towards a common goal. With oversight and fundraising from Pollinator Partnership, NAPPC is governed by a steering committee that is comprised of experts and leaders in the pollinator field. Each individual brings perspective, networks, and resources of their respective organizations, which include universities, government agencies, nonprofits, beekeeping groups, and agricultural interest groups. The steering committee meets monthly to keep up on current issues and projects pertaining to pollinators, and to serve as an advisory group for NAPPC annual initiatives, which you'll hear more about later on. NAPPC is a member-based collaborative for which an entity or individual must apply. The goal is to create a trusted cooperative group where differences can be set aside and all perspectives are valued. This is a snapshot of some of our members that contribute time and talent generously to the NAPPC mission. Corporations, federal and state governments, agriculture, museums, zoos, universities, and NGOs all have a seat at the NAPPC table and are invaluable to its success. The annual NAPPC International Conference is an international-only strategic event that brings together the world's preeminent scientists and pollinator experts to discuss current issues affecting pollinators and ways to further pollinator conservation. Each year, NAPPC has met a different federal agency, giving the agency a chance to learn more about pollinators and allowing the participants to learn more about the agency. NAPPC gathers world-renowned speakers from the United States, Canada, and Mexico to address participants and works hard to create an agenda that is based on current science and stakeholder interests. NAPPC celebrates 20 years of collaboration in 2020. Our annual conference will be hosted serendipitously by today's webinar hosts, the Smithsonian Institution at the National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. One of the most unique aspects of the meeting are the NAPPC Awards. Each year, we recognize individuals and groups that have contributed significantly to pollinator species protection and conservation through public education and good land stewardship. Bringing these efforts into the spotlight helps to inspire others to join the cause. Again, NAPPC is set apart from the average conference through the work of its task forces. Task forces are cross-discipline, short-term, project-oriented groups designed to accomplish specific tasks. The task forces are made up of diverse, interested parties, and not all NAPPC participants share exact perspectives and approaches. When we assemble as a NAPPC collaborative, we put aside personal and organizational agendas, we respect differing points of view, and we seek to find areas of commonality in order to increase broad-based progress for pollinators. We do have written ground rules to encourage respectful participation and send them to participants ahead of the meeting. Task forces worked together for 2 days straight at the conference, then continued to meet virtually throughout the coming year. It's been helpful to have a representative from the steering committee to keep an eye on the issues and suggest strategic responses. The group then reconvenes the following year at the next NAPPC conference to share results, get feedback, and refocus or establish new objectives. NAPPC task forces are voluntary commitments and are key to NAPPC's 20 years of success. The goal is for shared responsibility and shared credit in achievements for pollinators across North America. This approach is based in optimism and generosity of the collective. We must attack a crisis from all angles. And for NAPPC and pollinators, that means conservation, policy, science and research, engaging partners, and lastly, education and outreach, which is where my colleague, Dr. Kimberly Winter, will take you next. Kim, it is all yours.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kimberly Winter. I am currently the national leader for the NatureWatch program at the United States Forest Service. But before taking this position at the Forest Service, I was the first international coordinator of the NAPPC group, or the North American Pollinator Protection Campaign. So I've been involved with this movement for about 16 years, first by coordinating partners in the United States, Mexico, and Canada, and then and now as the secretary of the NAPPC Steering Committee. Like my other colleagues on this panel, I share a passion for conservation and the environment. But unlike my colleagues, I came to this work not from being an expert in pollinators or native plants. As a hobbyist beekeeper, a wildlife biologist, and an anthropologist with a passion for working on behalf of the underdog. And now my now 7-year-old daughter also loves beekeeping and pollinators as well. And pollinators are the underdog here. As Kelly Rourke mentioned, building a strong, diverse, international coalition of partners and using the tools of science are key elements to solving any crisis, especially that for pollinators. 20 years ago, pollinators weren't really mentioned in the news, they weren't taught in schools, and you didn't see them highlighted in grocery store shelves. They were the underdog without a voice, and we were only just beginning to understand the true extent of the pollinator crisis, especially as demonstrated in non-honeybee pollinators. And while science and collaboration behind the scenes build a framework for solving a crisis, giving a voice, loud and public, to a crisis and its solutions is the tool for change. I'd like to introduce you to some of the public-facing products of our NAPPC collaboration. These tools have pushed the voice of this underdog into the spotlight and have inspired audiences of all ages, ethnicities, education levels, and backgrounds to join us in our movement to stop pollinator decline, and not just in North America, but around the world. So let's start with Pollinator Week. In 2007, a couple of NAPPC partners, including Lori Adams and Dr. Larry Stritch of the Forest Service, decided to draw the public and policymakers into a conversation of helping pollinators by creating a national level proclamation of Pollinator Week. That proclamation was signed in 2007 and has been signed every year since by both the Secretaries of Agriculture as well as the Secretary of Interior. Soon thereafter, citizens started requesting proclamations from their state governors, and all 50 states signed on. Each proclamation declares the importance of pollinators to ecosystem health and functioning, to food supply, and to sustaining local and world economies. And from each proclamation of Pollinator Week arises more local, national, and international public interest in celebrating pollinators. From pollinator festivals to native wildflower walks to films and art installations. It is celebrated with media toolkits in 3 languages, Spanish, French, and English, to make the materials accessible to people across North America. And on Capitol Hill, Pollinator Week also includes a congressional briefing that brings lawmakers up to speed on the latest science and issues pollinators are facing each year. Every year since the first proclamation in 2007 has seen steady increases in news coverage of Pollinator Week. with hundreds of celebrations around the world registered at the pollinator.org website, and many more happening ad hoc in parks, schools, businesses, and neighborhoods. In 2019, pollinator.org registered 380 events in 10 countries around the world. And so the underdog has its voice and its special week. And there are also year-round tools that have been developed out of NAPPC task forces and by individuals who have generously donated their time and expertise to this cause. We have developed tools for educators, families, and children, including Nature's Partners, a comprehensive pollinator curriculum for children grades 3 through 6. This curriculum was the product of a NAPPC task force involving a team of partners from federal and state agencies, nonprofits, and education sectors working on a task force on education and outreach. The curriculum contains science-based separated 6 modules from why pollinators are important to how they can help in their own backyard. Another tool is the FS Nature Live series. These distance learning programs, such as Pollinator Live and Monarch Live, are geared towards middle to high school students and their teachers. The programs guide students through a year-long curriculum that includes activities for learning, electronic field trips, and a plethora of learning resources contributed by partners. Each program culminates in an online, kid-centered live broadcast from sites in the US, Canada, and/or Mexico. There's also the Local Heroes booklets. These are short booklets of pollinator activities with 5 levels of elementary school learning developed by NAPPC partners at the National Association of Conservation Districts, the US Department of Agriculture, and the Pollinator Partnership. And for all ages, the portal to many NAPPC pollinator education tools is found at pollinator.org, where advocates for solving the pollinator crisis can get brochures such as you see on your screen now. These are a series of brochures produced by a multitude of NAPPC task forces and partners on a variety of themes, from how to plant pollinator habitat on utility rights-of-way, to relationships between different world religions and pollinators, to bats as tropical pollinators. There's also Bee Basics, an introduction to our native bees, which is a beautifully illustrated guide to native bees of North America, created by one of the founding partners of NAPPC, Dr. Stephen Buckman, and Dr. Beatriz Mosed, in collaboration with US Forest Service and Pollinator Partnership and other partners. The Western Bee and the Eastern Bumblebee guides and identification posters are now used by countless teams of scientists and citizen scientist volunteers who monitor and identify bees in the wild. And the Attracting Pollinators to Your Garden Using Native Plants booklet is an easy guide for gardeners and homeowners seeking simple ways to provide additional habitat for pollinators at a small scale. Along with these come the bookmarks, the Trees Need Beads series, the Monarch series, and the Native Bees series of bookmarks are easily distributed snippets of information that can catch the attention of readers and inspire them to learn more about pollinators. And our own Forest Service Celebrating Wildflowers website has over 80,000 pages of content on pollinators and native wildflowers, much of which was co-produced by NAPPC partners and links back to the portal of our NAPPC collaboration at pollinator.org. We've also done film. The NAPPC partners provided expert guidance and spotlight interviews as part of the Pollinators Under Pressure and the Pollinators and Farms Under Pressure short film documentaries. These were narrated by world-renowned actors Leonardo DiCaprio and Walton Goggins. These short film projects included teams of advisors from our NAPPC coalition and helped to spread even broader the message of pollinator crisis and the solutions that everyone has at hand to help. In 2006, the US Postal Service issued a beautiful series of 41-cent stamps illustrating the ecological relationships between plants and pollinators, including a bat, a bumblebee, a butterfly, and a hummingbird. In 2017, the Postal Service did it again with a pollinator-themed series with the title Protect Pollinators, this time with photographs as a forever stamp. And even major US cities are getting on board with solving the pollinator crisis. NAPPC partners from the Forest Service, the National Wildlife Federation, the US Fish and Wildlife Service, University of Georgia, and others have joined forces to reduce urban sprawl and create pollinator gardens in a 25-mile radius around the city of Atlanta, Georgia, called the Greater Atlanta Pollinator Partnership, or GAP project. These are just a sample of the myriad media and types of approaches that we, as a NAPPC coalition, have used to educate the public about pollinators and to equip those newly interested audiences in taking action to be part of the solution to the pollinator crisis. This model can be applied to other crises as well. I learned so much through working with the scientists, specialists, educators, policymakers, gardeners, and other diverse partners of the NAPPC collaboration that I have carried this model forward to other movements for conservation, such as Bat Week, which there are bat pollinators, and even this year's upcoming Amphibian Week. For more inspiration and a deeper dive into some of these other products of our NAPPC collaboration, I'd like to introduce Dr. Gary Krupnick, again, from the Smithsonian Institution. Over to you, Gary.
Thank you, Kim. I am just getting my talks lined up here. Okay, here we go. And just one more adjustment here. All right, I hope everyone could see me just fine. I am Gary Krupnick from Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History. The Natural History Museum has been a proud partner of NAPPC since its inception over 20 years ago. Since 2004, I have served on NAPPC's steering committee, and in 2017, I became the steering committee's U.S. vice chair. Since 2004, the Smithsonian has hosted several annual NAPPC meetings over its 20-year history. The Natural History Museum is hosting the 2020 meeting this October. Now, to build off of what Kim was just talking about with all the tools that NAPPC has produced, one other product that NAPPC has produced is 55 ecoregional planting guides. These guides were funded by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, the CS Fund, the U.S. Plant Conservation Alliance, the U.S. Forest Service, and the Bureau of Land Management. Pollinator Partnership provided oversight. And in my role, representing the Smithsonian, I was part of a team that provided concept review for each guide. The guides are called Selecting Plants for Pollinators, and there are 32 for the US and 23 for Canada. The beauty of these planting guides is that they are specific to each ecological region. If you don't know which ecoregion you live in, the pollinator.org website has a tool in which you can type in your zip code in the US or your postal code in Canada, and it'll show you which guide is appropriate for you. Each guide provides a list of plants that will attract pollinators, as shown here for the southeastern mixed forest. Plants are grouped by plant type, trees and shrubs, perennial flowers, and vines. The table provides information on sun and soil requirements for proper growth. It also shows which pollinators typically visit the plants, so gardens can target specific pollinators if you wish. The table shows which plants serve as host plants, those plants that provide food for the larval stages of the pollinators. People shopping for plants can use these lists at their local garden center or nursery. We also have a new tool currently in development through a NAPPC task force. These are called garden recipe cards. And like a food recipe card, these cards have ingredients, steps to prepare your dish, and pictures for the new chef. But instead of ingredients, these recipes have a list of suggested plants that you should be able to find at your local nursery. And instead of cooking directions, these cards provide instructions on how to plant your garden. On the flip side of each card is, instead of a picture of your meal, you have pictures of the plants that you will plant. These are separated by blooming season, so you can see which plants will be blooming during the spring, summer, and fall seasons. Having plants in your garden that bloom each season provides pollinators with food year-round, from early spring to the end of fall. I should note that these recipe cards are currently in draft form. We are still finalizing the look and content of each card, and we hope to have them finalized before Pollinator Week this June. Once complete, these cards will be available for download on pollinator.org, and our NAPPC partners will also print and provide cards within their own networks. To get people more informed, educated, and excited about pollinators, NAPPC has been producing educational posters, a different one each year. Our first set of posters were fantastic introductory tools to bring attention to what pollinators are and why they are important in maintaining healthy habitats, ecosystems, and how they benefit mankind. To showcase the collaborative spirit of NAPPC, each poster features the logos of NAPPC partners and other sponsors at the bottom of the poster. Posters are sent to schools and educational groups throughout North America, and NAPPC partners also share their posters in their networks. And again, these posters are available on pollinator.org. In 2012, the posters took on a new direction. We began to focus on specific themes and looked at specific plant-animal interactions. The 2012 poster, called Pollinator Pathways, examined 4 migratory species: the lesser long-nosed bat, the rufous hummingbird, the ruby-throated hummingbird, and the monarch butterfly. And it also featured 12 different plant species that are pollinated by these animals. In 2014, I joined the Pollinator Week poster task force. We focus on orchid species and the pollinators that visit them. And in my role as a scientist at the Natural History Museum, I made sure that the science was correct in between the pollinator and the plant. The Orchid Week poster featured 7 different plant-animal interactions native to Canada, the US, and Mexico. The poster was produced in collaboration with the North American Orchid Conservation Center, a group which focuses on protecting all orchid species of North America. And it highlights interesting interactions. On that top row there in the center is the Canadian orchid, the blunt-leaved orchid, Platanthera obtusata. And little did most people know is that it's pollinated by the mosquito, Aedes communis. So again, most people didn't realize that mosquitoes can actually serve as pollinators. Over the years, we produced more posters. Here is They Don't Eat Their Pollinators, a poster about carnivorous plants and how they separate their animal traps from their flowers. Trees for Bees focused on the importance of tree species as important food sources for pollinators. It was so popular that the American Horticultural Society hoped to display this poster in an enormous number of nurseries across the country. The Monarch Highway talked in detail about monarch migration, and last year's poster, Endangered Pollinators and Their Habitats, provides information on 22 endangered pollinator species and the plants they depend on. And as a side note, if we go back to the carnivorous plant poster, it features in the center at the bottom there the Venus flytrap. To get the science correct, we wanted to feature the exact species that pollinates the Venus flytrap in the wild. And when the poster was produced, we noted that there was not a single published scientific study in describing what pollinates the Venus flytrap in the wild. After the poster's release, a professor in North Carolina conducted a study and found that a sweat bee and 2 beetle species are confirmed pollinators of the Venus flytrap. So these posters actually led to some interesting scientific studies. This year's poster is called Our Future Flies with Pollinators. And it was just released and it's available for download now and purchase on pollinator.org. It features 6 plant-animal interactions in the center circle, and it features 12 ecosystem services outside the circle. Pollinators and native plants provide many ecosystem services that support the health of people and the planet, and this poster highlights those services. So all of NAPPC's posters continue to teach and engage as they are displayed in nature centers and schools across the US, Canada, and Mexico. And I should also mention that all posters are trilingual, with statements in English, French, and Spanish. With all these tools at hand, school garden kit to eco-regional planning guides to recipe cards and Pollinator Week posters, we finally found that we had the tools to launch the Million Pollinator Garden Challenge. The challenge is a nationwide call to action to preserve and create gardens and landscapes that help revive the health of pollinators across the US. Behind the challenge is the National Pollinator Garden Network, which is a partnership between many NAPPC conservation groups, gardening groups, volunteer civic associations, and federal agencies. The challenge calls for people to plant pollinator gardens and then register your garden online. Registering a garden is easy, and it could be a backyard garden, a garden planted at a school ground, on corporate land, or at even places of worship. They could be as small as a box on your apartment balcony, or as great as a large field next to your office building. Proudly, after 3 years, the challenge surpassed its goal of over 1,056,000 registered gardens. Each green dot represents a new habitat for pollinators. If you measure the amount of land that was restored or enhanced for pollinators, we're looking at approximately 5 million acres that are benefiting pollinators today. Just look at all those dots. Okay, now we're talking about a sense of optimism here. The next step is to see if pollinators are truly benefiting from these gardens, studies that I'm sure will pop up in future task forces. And not only did this challenge reach people throughout all 50 states of the US, but it also reached people in South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, and Australia. All these people registered gardens on this site as well. So this truly has become a global effort. And so yes, I do have hope. We have the tools that can help both pollinators and the plants that support them. We're still a ways away from solving the pollinator crisis, so I'm gonna pass over the talk now to David Inouye, who's gonna dive into the science behind pollinators. David, take it away.
Thank you, Gary. And I'm happy to be here. I'm David Inouye, and I'm from a faculty member, retired faculty member from the University of Maryland. And I'm also a principal investigator at the Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory, which is in Colorado, up at 9,500 feet, still under snow. There's a picture down here in the lower left of what it looks like during the summer. And I've been associated with the North American Pollinator Protection Campaign for almost since its beginning, so about 20 years now. NAPPC is unusual because of its close collaboration of scientists together with policymakers, with beekeepers, with land managers, and others who are interested in the protection of pollinators. And I'm happy to help provide the role of a scientist to the work that NAPPC does. Pictures here are two of the species of bumblebees that I've worked with at the Rocky Mountain Biological Lab, where I also work with pollinators. I'm speaking to you today from my house near Paonia, Colorado, and just yesterday we saw our first broad-tailed hummingbird here, and that helps to make the point that pollination really needs to be an international project, because that broad-tailed hummingbird spent the winter down in Mexico and has now arrived up here in Colorado for the breeding season. So what is the role of scientists in NAPPC, or maybe even in society in general? I think our primary role is to help gather data that help us to identify pollinator species and also identify which ones are at risk. And for instance, here is a picture of a mosquito. Gary talked in his segment about orchid pollination, and that yellow dot that you can see near the head of the mosquito is a little bundle of orchid pollen that mosquito picked up when she visited an orchid flower for nectar, and then she came to me to try and get a blood meal, but I caught her and took her picture before I let her go so she could go on and pollinate another orchid. Another role of scientists is to help to identify the threats that pollinators face. For instance, loss of habitat, lots of floral resources. They need pollen and nectar to raise the next generation of pollinators. Introduced diseases. Unfortunately, we people have moved various pollinator diseases around the world and introduced them to areas where they didn't occur before. And then also the use of pesticides is another threat that pollinators face, and scientists study all of those. Once we've identified those threats, scientists can also recommend how to mitigate those threats. So for instance, you might alleviate problems with loss of habitat by planting hedgerows or by leaving unplowed field margins at the edges of fields as places for wildflowers to grow, to provide nectar and pollen, and also to provide habitat for nesting. Another role that scientists have realized that they need to be more active in is to help convey what they're learning to policymakers, who can then implement policy to help do things like protect pollinators. We can also share that information with land managers, who can take action to do things like modify habitats, restore habitats for pollinators. And finally, we can also encourage everyone to help support pollinators through activities that you've already heard something about this morning, such as planting pollinator-friendly gardens, also helping to lobby politicians and land managers to take action on behalf of pollinators. NAPPC has a number of scientific accomplishments, in 2006, Dr. Kim Winter, who you've already heard from, spearheaded writing of a white paper and recommendations on issues surrounding non-native bumblebee importation for use in agriculture. And the reason this was an issue is that people realized commercial tomatoes are grown mostly in greenhouses, and greenhouses aren't great places for natural pollinators, native pollinators. And a company in Europe discovered that they could figure out how to commercialize the annual colonies of bumblebees and ship them around the world to tomato growers. And they started shipping European species of bumblebee to various places around the world. Fairly quickly, pollination biologists realized that was becoming a problem because those bees were escaping the greenhouses and colonizing in areas where they'd never occurred before and becoming competitors with native honey bumblebees, and then also bringing in diseases that were harming the native species. These pictures on the left is a Bombus terrestris, a European species of bumblebee, which has now been established in a variety of places around the world. And on the right is a species of bumblebee, the largest species of bumblebee in the world. That's a picture that I took in Argentina last winter. And that native species in Argentina has almost disappeared now because of competition from the introduced species and also because of the diseases that it's brought in. In 2007, NAPPC helped to push the National Academy of Sciences to conduct a study about the status of pollinators in North America. This was the first study of its kind, brought together scientists from across North America, including a number of NAPPC scientists and me as well. And we quickly discovered that one of the major problems facing a study like this was that there's not very much known about most of the pollinators in the world. For instance, of the 4,000 or so species of native bees here in North America, I would guess that we will only have data for just a handful of those species on a complete description of where they occur, how they're doing, and what their futures are. So that 2007 study that NAPPC helped to foster was a very important landmark and helped to provide guidance to land managers and also to politicians. The success of that study was in part what lay behind the United Nations deciding that its new Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services should tackle as its first assignment an assessment report on pollinators, pollination, and food production. And I and other NAPPC scientists were members of that international group that worked on that project. Also a very important tool now for policymakers because we have a separate chapter and summary of that report specifically for policymakers around the world, telling them what they can do to help encourage protection of pollinators. Both those resources I might mention, both those reports are available online. Another effort of NAPPC's is the Honeybee Health Task Force. You've heard a little bit about the task forces already, but one of the things that this task force does is to provide research grants for studies of honeybee health. And those projects are chosen to provide practical information for beekeepers and to have immediate applications and results. We also have a NAPPC scientist report on honeybee stressors that's available. In 2017, a NAPPC scientist and his colleagues produced a paper about how to manage arthropod vectors, including pollinators, and that's also been an important resource for scientists. So we do know something now about pollinators. There's a lot left that we need to know. We need to know more about their distribution. We need to know more about their abundance and more about their status. And we have some hope that we're going to make progress on this. The United States Department of Agriculture has just funded a 3-year project to establish a new national monitoring plan for native bees here in North America, or at least in the United States. So that group is working right now to try and figure out how do we start monitoring those 4,000 plus native bee species. We also have an effort at the Rocky Mountain Biological Lab, which is a hotbed of pollination biologists, where we've been sampling 11 for 11 years now, every other week at 3 different altitudes, sampling about 100 and I think it's about 130 now native bee species that occur in that East River Valley around the Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory. And that effort is ongoing now, fortunately, with funding from the National Science Foundation. But we need to know not just about the native bees, we also need to know about the flies, the beetles, the hummingbirds, and all the other pollinators. That picture here, you might have thought when you glanced at it was a bumblebee, but actually that is a fly that mimics bumblebees, and it serves also as an important pollinator. So let me turn it back now to Gary Krupnick to wind this up. Thank you.
And thank you, David. Let me just bring it all home now. Let's see. Here we go. So again, as David was just saying, we're still quite a ways away from solving the actual pollinator crisis, but working collaboratively with science, partnership, and public-facing tools, we can keep magnifying the voices of pollinators so they won't be, as Dr. Winter called them, silent underdogs ever again. Let me emphasize or re-emphasize the key to NAPPC's success. NAPPC has based all of its decisions entirely on science. NAPPC has involved stakeholders from many perspectives built on collaboration and trust. NAPPC's progress has been incremental and strategic, and NAPPC's partners share resources, we share opportunities, and we share credit. So whether your organization works with frogs or fish, with caribou or coral, we hope you and your partners can adapt the NAPPC model and succeed in collaborative conservation. So you can, now we're happy to take questions from the audience. At the bottom of your screen is the Q&A box. Please use that box to ask questions. And let me also introduce Kathleen Law from Pollinator Partnership. She will be acting as a moderator and be reading some of those questions to the panelists. So, and I should also say before Kathleen speaks that if you need to reach any of the speakers, feel free to use nappc@pollinator.org, and they can forward any questions or requests to individual speakers as well. So Kathleen, what sort of questions do we have out there?
Hello. Well, the first one that's come up quite a few times is people would like to share and see this presentation again. So maybe if we could give some information about how and when that'll happen.
Okay, so Earth Optimism, the Earth Optimism Summit at Smithsonian is recording all events. And as soon as this session is over, I will have a video recorded. I will share it with our Earth Optimism team. And I'm not sure what their timeline is. We're looking at a week or so. They will be uploading that, I think, to YouTube, if not other sources. And that way you can share this video with your classrooms, with other interested people. It should be available soon.
Great, thank you. So a question from Heidi Western, which is, does NAPPC have any materials on mowing guidelines? And Heidi had also asked, what are some tips for lawns overseeding with thyme or clover? Any materials or recommendations?
I can start that one. This is Kelly. We at Pollinator Partnership and NAPPC do have a learning center at pollinator.org, and there's a gardening section. And there's lots of resources about mowing, lawn care, gardening, things like that. And I also know that one of our task forces, which is on urban pollinators, is working right now on some tips for homeowners, if you're in an HOA group or a neighborhood, how to kind of share your pollinator-friendly practices with your nearby homeowners, and to tell them about not to be afraid if your lawn's looking a little wild, to embrace it and note that it's really helping pollinators.
Great, thank you, Kelly. And I can share a link to that in the chat box in a few minutes. So next question is from a DM Rod. Do you have any steps or information on how to encourage local conservation commissions to become involved in NAPPC?
I think one of the first steps would be perhaps to contact those people and let them know about this presentation. Also to give them information about the NAPPC.org website and let them know that there are a number of resources there that may be of use to them. Maybe just comment also on that last question about lawns. I've got a lot of dandelions in my quote-unquote lawn, and they're very popular with, those flowers are very popular with bees all times of the year. Right now, there are a number of solitary bees visiting those flowers. There are also bumblebees that will sometimes visit them. So if you can live with dandelions in your lawn or with clover in your lawn, those are good resources for native bees. But even better is if you can perhaps convert some of that lawn to a pollinator garden.
Great, thank you, David. So to recap about where to find some information on becoming involved with NAPPC is to share this presentation and also to visit the NAPPC website at pollinator.org. And for lawns to tolerate those dandelions. Thank you. So next question from from Susan is, what progress have we made in combating establishment of non-native bumblebees? Is there anything citizens can do?
Well, I suppose if you are good enough at identifying bumblebees that you can recognize non-native ones, you could actually catch those and stick them in your freezer. Fortunately, here in most parts of the United States, we don't have a lot of introduced non-native bumblebee species. The USDA has recognized that problem now of commerce in non-native bumblebees, and so the commercial bumblebee providers in this country are now restricted to shipping species of bumblebees that are native only to the parts of the country where they're being shipped. And there's also a prohibition now against bringing non-native bumblebees into the country. So I think there's not a whole lot that individual citizens need to do in their backyards about the issue of non-native bumblebees, but pay attention to this national issue of policy to try and help prevent the spread of non-native pollinators.
Great, thank you, David. So we have a question from Robin Taylor Davenport. What are your suggestions for pollinator assessments on national forests? Do you have set monitoring protocols that you would have the Forest Service botanists or native plant and pollinator coordinators use?
One of the things that this new research coordination network is doing to establish a national monitoring program for native bees will be to try and come up with a recommended protocol for sampling. Right now, there are some monitoring projects going on, in particular one spearheaded by a scientist named Sam Droege, D-R-O-E-G-E, who's with the Fish and Wildlife Service, I believe, in near Laurel, Maryland. And he's established a protocol for using pan traps for sampling bees. And what that involves is putting out plastic cups of different colors with a soap water solution in it. And bees are attracted to these colored cups and try and land in them and end up drowning. But those bees are then collected and sent back to Sam Droege, who helps with his assistants to identify those bees. And so that sampling program has become one of the standard protocols for keeping track of native bees.
Thank you. We have a question from Grace Weckesser. So besides education, like literature and online resources and planting pollinator gardens, what are other ways that NAPPC works towards pollinator conservation? Are there other initiatives people can partake in?
Yeah, there are many ways that NAPPC is working beyond the garden and beyond educational resources. I think one of the strongest ways that we can impact the landscape is by working with land managers, so like the Forest Service or like roadside managers. So we have a lot of resources and technical guidance that we provide to those types of people. So we have roadside manager guides, rights of way and utility guides, farm management guides. So I think there's lots of acreage in those types of landscapes and managed lands. So getting to those people, educating the professionals that are working on those landscapes and how they can best manage land for pollinators can be really, really effective. And also through our NAPPC awards, again, we like to shed light on those individuals and organizations, agencies that are doing the good stewardship work. So we have roadside managers awards, electric power awards. So really highlighting those good practices can help kind of snowball the effect.
And NAPPC has also produced many flyers on pesticide usage to help reduce pesticide usage, not just in your home garden, but with farmers and ranchers as well.
Great, thank you. So actually on that note, we have a question from Kaylee Walters. Can you talk more about what the businesses working with NAPPC are doing and outreach to other businesses and corporations? There's always a lot of emphasis on what individuals can do in environmental issues, but businesses can have a much larger impact. What are they doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So so a lot of NAPPC members, like those I just talked about, rights of way, roadsides, they're involved in NAPPC to learn about best management practices for pollinators. So that's kind of one aspect of it. Other corporations like food producers or food product companies that obviously have a big stake in pollinators and what they do can have a big impact by supporting other pollinator advocacy groups like NAPPC, Pollinator Partnership. There are many others out there. So I know that a lot of times companies will engage in research and science on their landscapes. So that's a great way of getting involved, supporting actual science and research, as well as even transitioning their corporate campuses to pollinator-friendly landscaping can be a great way. So, and teaching employees and teaching your community that the corporations are in about pollinators and their importance.
And one of our NAPPC partners is the Wildlife Habitat Council, and they actually even run special appreciations for corporations who are doing pollinator habitat. They provide guidance on how to create massive corporate headquarter pollinator habitat, and they give tons and tons of guidance. And I think they have over like 600 different corporations that are working in wildlife habitat certification through their programs.
Great, thank you. So we have a question from May Welts, which went through the chat function. I see, Kim, that you answered her, but it only went to all panelists. So I'll repeat it again. May's question is, thank you for talking today. Do you have any resources available on the negative impacts of invasive species, including invasive plants, on pollinators and other wildlife and their control? So Kim, I think you had a few resource links that you shared that we could maybe share again in the chat function.
Yeah, so I put in the link to the Bombus terrestris paper. There's also other available information through our NAPPC partners, including some of the people who've been doing research on pollinators. That is available if you want to contact us directly. That would be easy to do. David or Gary might have some other suggestions for research on those invasive species.
Great, thank you. We have a question. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead with the next question.
Okay, so a question from Sharon Richardson. If we have done a project that might be useful to your organization, who should we share it with?
Yeah, so the best way to do that would be to email NAPPC, so NAPPC @pollinator.org, and that email actually goes to me, and I will make sure it gets to the right person within NAPPC.
And I should say that if you have fantastic ideas for future projects, NAPPC has multiple task forces, and each year the task force addresses individual projects. And so with the upcoming meeting in October, we might add some new task forces. And if you have some interesting ideas, the steering committee would be happy to hear that.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Vanya Almoslao. Can you share more about your work in partnership with organizations in Mexico?
Yeah, I can start with that, and then Kim probably has some to add as well. But so our organization partners in Mexico are primarily university-based at this point, with some nonprofits. We work hard to engage Mexico in our annual conferences. We do have a steering committee member, Dr. Coro Arizmendi, who is from UNAM, which is the largest university in Mexico. She's in Mexico City. She's a hummingbird specialist. So we are very grateful to have her on our steering committee. She really helps us get connected within the country. We also have a lot of partners in the monarch overwintering grounds. The central migration of monarch butterflies overwinters in central Mexico. So we do have some nonprofit partners there that are helping to preserve the OML forest in Mexico, and kind of forest preservation as well. So I hope that answers the question, but if not, Kim probably has more.
We also have Dr. Rodrigo Medellin, who is a bat scientist, globally renowned bat scientist, and works on pollinating bats. And so there's a nice group in Mexico. It's difficult for those folks to come up to the United States to attend our annual meetings. It's a little bit tricky to get up here, but we do remain in contact via email and through our groups. So if anybody would like to get in touch with any of them, we're happy to put you in touch as well.
Great. So we have quite a few questions that touch on a similar theme. Which is about how people can get involved, how organizations can get involved. So for example, we have one from Jennifer Palmer. Do you collaborate with any organizations on service-based learning, community service, or vocational training programs?
Yeah, so we have some programs at Pollinator Partnership, one of which that comes to mind is called Project Wingspan, which is taking place in 10 states in the Midwest. You can get to that from our Monarch Butterfly page. This is a landscape level conservation effort in the Midwest, and we do actually recruit volunteers for this. We're creating a seed collection network throughout these states. So we actually do train people in seed collection protocols based on BLM's Seeds of Success protocol. And we also are looking for seed collection sites, as well as plant material distribution sites. So we have forums where you can sign up on our website, and as well as an online portal where you can get fully trained in seed collection. So that's a great way to get involved. We also have a pollinator stewardship certification program, which is where Pollinator Partnership and NAPPC will help you put together a workshop essentially to train either whether it's a master gardener groups or land managers in pollinator stewardship, and its actual certification process that is a professional development tool. There's also tons of citizen science efforts that you can get involved in. We have a Insight Citizen Science app. It is really fun, great way to get outdoors, especially during this time of social distancing. And it teaches you how to monitor for pollinators out in the field, and teaches basic pollinator group identification. There's lots of other citizen science groups. I think Kim might know of some more as well.
I think you covered them all, Kelly.
Okay.
Thanks, Kelly. So a couple of questions on a theme. So Nancy asked, do you use anything from iNaturalist? Kimberly Conway is asking, can you share ways in which people can participate in the City Nature Challenge and share their pollinator captures with a global citizen science database through iNaturalist? Not sure if this is something that we're familiar with, but maybe we can speak about these citizen science opportunities.
Yeah, so there are a lot of citizen science projects out there. iNaturalist is a fantastic source to record your plants and pollinators in your neighborhoods. Uh, Chicago Botanic Garden has Project Budburst, in which it's measuring phenology of when new flowers are opening to understand how climate change is affecting pollination. And so there are so many short resources out there, and I suggest you try to find them and try to participate if you can, especially in these days of quarantine. If you could participate in your own backyard, a lot of science can come from good observations.
Let me mention also two other organizations. One is the USA National Phenology Network, and that's now a national organization focused on getting citizen scientists as well as scientists to collect data about the timing of seasonal events. That's what phenology is, and in particular about flowers and floral resources. So that's become a way that citizen scientists across the country have been helping to collect information. And so if you look up the National Phenology Network, you can link to their website. Also the Xerces Society, and that's spelled Xerces, and xerces.org. They are particularly focused on the conservation of invertebrates, and including pollinators, and they sponsor a bumblebee watch program, for instance, where you can photograph bumblebees in your yard, upload those photographs to have them identified, and help provide information about the status, distribution, and abundance of bumblebees.
So I think we are out of time. It's been a full hour. Lots more questions there, and I'm sorry we didn't get to answer them all. But I thank you all. First, let me thank all the panelists for participating. I hope the audience enjoyed and learned something exciting today. And feel free to share this once it's up online on YouTube or elsewhere. Go to earthoptimism.si.edu, and you'll be able to find this recording when it's posted. And we'll also share it on pollinator.org when it's available.